I'm neglected middle child who finally stood up for myself after years of forgotten birthdays. Wait until you see the bold move that left my family absolutely speechless. And then, my name is Nate Wilson, and for as long as I can remember, my birthdays have been nothing more than a footnote in the chaos of my family's life. I don't mean to sound dramatic, but when you've lived through what I have, it's hard not to feel like the forgotten piece of a puzzle. My family, my parents, my older brother Kyle, and my younger sister Emily, never seemed to realize just how much they left me behind. Growing up in Seattle in the 1980s, our household was always busy. My dad was a contractor, constantly working late nights, and my mom juggled running the house and a part-time job at the library. Kyle was the golden child, the firstborn, with his head full of big dreams and my parents' endless attention. Emily, the baby of the family, was the princess, with her charm and sharp wit that could light up a room. And then there was me, the middle child, the one who was expected to blend in and not cause any trouble. It wasn't always glaringly obvious. When I was little, I didn't think much about how things were split between us. But as I got older, the patterns became impossible to ignore. My earliest memory of feeling different, less than, was on my 9th birthday. Kyle had just turned 12 a few months earlier. My parents had thrown him the kind of birthday party that made kids at school jealous for weeks. Our backyard was transformed into a superhero wonderland. There were balloons shaped like comic book characters, a magician who made Kyle's favorite action figure disappear and reappear, and a mountain of gifts that spilled across the patio. The neighbors came over to see the spectacle, and my dad even rented a camera to capture every moment. By the time my birthday came around, I wasn't expecting the same level of excitement. I knew that a 9th birthday wasn't as big as turning 12, but I thought there'd at least be some effort. Maybe a cake, a few friends, a little fuss. I sat at the dinner table that night, waiting for someone to mention it. My mom talked about Kyle's upcoming soccer game. My dad went on about a new contract he had landed. Emily, who was only 6 at the time, drew pictures on the back of a napkin. Nobody said a word about my birthday. When I finally worked up the courage to ask, "Did you guys forget?" My mom gave me this half smile and said, "Oh, Nate, we've been so busy. We'll make it up to you next year." Next year never came. The following years weren't any better. By the time Kyle turned 16, he had a birthday party so big it felt like the whole city showed up. My parents hired a DJ, decorated the community center, and even rented a limo to take him and his friends to a baseball game. When I turned 16 2 years later, I got a text from my parents that said, "Happy birthday, Nate. Love you." That was it. It wasn't just the birthdays. It was every milestone, every achievement, every moment that should have been special. Emily had a sweet 16 that looked like it was straight out of a movie. She wore a custom-made dress, and my parents even hired a professional photographer to capture every detail. I was 20 by then, and it didn't bother me as much on the surface, but deep down, it still stung. By the time I graduated high school, I had learned not to expect much. On my graduation day, my family sat in the audience, but they didn't even stick around for pictures. My mom was rushing to get Emily to a piano recital, and my dad was busy talking to Kyle about his summer internship. I went home alone that night and stared at the photos of me in my cap and gown. The realization hit me hard. I was invisible to them. I stopped trying to make a big deal out of my birthdays after that. By the time I turned 21, I was working part-time while finishing college. My friends threw me a small party at a local diner, and it was the best birthday I'd had in years. They gave me a second-hand record player and a stack of vinyl records they'd pooled money to buy. My parents didn't even call that year. The thing is, I tried to change it. I really did. I reminded my parents weeks in advance, dropped hints about wanting to do something small, or even asked if we could just have dinner together. But something always came up. Kyle's promotion, Emily's college acceptance, a family friend's anniversary. It didn't matter what I said or did. My birthday always landed at the bottom of their priority list. It wasn't just about the lack of celebration. It was about what it represented. I watched my parents pour so much time and energy into Kyle and Emily, making sure their milestones were unforgettable. When it came to me, though, it felt like they didn't even try. I didn't hate my family for it, but I started resenting the way they made me feel like I didn't matter. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I decided to stop waiting for them to notice me. I wasn't going to beg for scraps of attention anymore. If they couldn't be bothered to celebrate me, I'd figure out how to celebrate myself. But it wasn't just about having a party or getting gifts. It was about reclaiming something I'd lost along the way. I wanted to remind myself that I was worth the effort, even if my family couldn't see it. That's when the idea first started forming in my head. Something big, something bold, something they couldn't ignore. I didn't know exactly what it would be yet, but I knew one thing for sure. This year, things were going to be different. For once in my life, my birthday wasn't going to be a forgotten echo. It was going to be a statement, and it was going to be unforgettable. By the time I turned 27, I had officially given up on hoping my family would ever treat my birthday as anything more than an afterthought. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was this dull, heavy acceptance, like carrying a bag of bricks around without realizing it was weighing you down. But something shifted in me that year. Maybe it was getting older, or maybe it was just exhaustion from years of feeling like I didn't matter. I decided I was done waiting for scraps of acknowledgement. I decided I was going to take control. The idea didn't hit me all at once. It was more of a gradual realization, a flicker that turned into a flame. I was sitting with my best friend Ryan in his garage one rainy afternoon. He'd been tinkering with his motorcycle while I vented about another uneventful birthday. "Dude, I'm telling you," Ryan said, wiping his hands on a rag, "you've got to stop waiting for them to change. They're not going to wake up one day and suddenly start treating you differently. You've got to make them see it." "See what?" I asked, slouched in a beat-up lawn chair. "That they can't just ignore you anymore. Make it impossible for them to overlook you." His words stuck with me. That night, I sat down at my desk, staring at the blank wall in front of me. I thought about all the things I'd wished for over the years. A real celebration, a sense of belonging, maybe just one day where I felt like I was the priority. I didn't need anyone else to give me that. I could give it to myself. The question was how. At first, I considered something simple, like buying myself a fancy gift. A new car? Maybe a designer watch? But every idea felt hollow, like I'd just be trying to fill a void that ran deeper than material things. I didn't want to buy happiness. I wanted to make a statement. Then, one night, while scrolling through vacation blogs, it hit me. A luxury family trip. Something so extravagant, so undeniably huge, that they couldn't brush it off. A trip that wasn't just about the destination. It was about the message. I could already see it. My family sitting in stunned silence as I announced that I'd planned and paid for a vacation for all of us. It wouldn't be about them, though. It would be about reclaiming the years I'd spent waiting for someone to celebrate me. The more I thought about it, the more the idea grew. I started researching options, resorts, tours, exotic destinations, but nothing felt quite right. Then, as if the universe was speaking directly to me, I stumbled across a website for luxury cruises. The photos were mesmerizing. Crystal clear waters, gourmet dining, private excursions, and five-star accommodations. This was it. I spent hours digging into the details. I wanted it to be perfect, something they'd never forget. After days of searching, I finally settled on a top-tier cruise through the Caribbean. It wasn't cheap. It was going to cost me a significant chunk of my savings, but I didn't care. This wasn't just about the trip. It was about making a point. With the cruise booked, I started planning the reveal. I didn't want to just drop the news casually over dinner. This had to be an event, something dramatic enough to leave an impression. I decided to rent a small venue in downtown Seattle, something classy but not over the top. I reached out to a few close friends, and they were immediately on board to help. "You're a genius," Ryan said when I told him the plan. "This is going to blow their minds." Over the next few weeks, I poured all my energy into making it happen. I designed invitations, crafted a slideshow presentation, and even started teasing the announcement on social media. I wasn't specific. I just dropped hints about a big reveal coming up. My friends played along, hyping it up in the comments and adding to the mystery. Meanwhile, my family remained oblivious. The group chat was filled with updates about Kyle's promotion party, which he'd conveniently scheduled for the same week as my birthday. Everyone was congratulating him, making plans, and gushing over how proud they were. Not a single mention of my birthday. It was almost funny at this point. I started dropping subtle hints during phone calls with my mom. I mentioned I had something exciting planned for my birthday, but she brushed it off, saying, "That's nice, Nate. Don't forget about Kyle's party, though." Classic. The week before the big reveal, my sister Emily called me out of the blue. "Hey, do you have plans for your birthday?" she asked, her tone casual but curious. "Yeah, a few things," I replied, keeping it vague. "Like what?" "You'll see." She paused, clearly fishing for more information, but I didn't give her anything. The night before my birthday, my parents finally remembered to call. Well, sort of. The conversation started with my mom asking if I could bring something to Kyle's party, a fruit platter, or maybe some drinks. "Sure," I said, playing along. "By the way, did you guys make any plans for my birthday?" There was a long silence. Then my mom muttered something about maybe grabbing dinner if there's time. "Don't worry about it," I said with a smile they couldn't see. "I've got it handled." As I hung up, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. They had no idea what was coming. That night, I finalized everything. The invitations had been sent, the venue was ready, and the slideshow presentation was perfect. I even prepared a short speech to explain why I was doing this, not just for them, but for myself. Before bed, I posted one final teaser on social media, a countdown clock with the words, "Less than 24 hours to go." The comments flooded in almost immediately. "What is it? Don't leave us hanging. Can't wait to see what this is about." For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my story. My birthday was no longer a forgotten date on the calendar. It was about to become a turning point. Tomorrow was going to change everything. The morning of my 28th birthday started the same way it always had. Silence. No calls, no texts, no acknowledgement from my family. I woke up early, made coffee, and sat by the window, staring out at the gray Seattle skyline. My phone buzzed, but it wasn't my parents or siblings. It was Ryan. "Happy birthday, man. Big day today," his message read. I smiled and sent a quick reply, thanking him for being the first person to remember. Within minutes, more messages from friends started rolling in. They were hyping me up, cracking jokes, and asking if I was ready for the big event. It was the kind of attention I'd craved for years, not because I needed to feel special, but because it felt good to be seen. By mid-morning, I headed to the venue downtown. It was a small, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in plenty of light, even on a cloudy day. Ryan and a few other friends were already there, helping to set up decorations and check the equipment for the presentation. "Place looks great," Ryan said as he adjusted a banner that read, "Nate's big announcement." "Thanks," I replied, glancing around. The room was simple but elegant. White tablecloths, small floral arrangements, and a table of party favors I'd put together for the guests. At the front of the room was a projector screen, ready to display the slideshow I'd spent weeks perfecting. The guests started arriving around noon. Most were extended family members, cousins, aunts, and uncles who had always been kind to me, even if they weren't particularly close. They mingled, curious about what I had planned, but still in the dark about the specifics. "Are you running for office or something?" one of my cousins joked. "Not quite," I said with a grin. The atmosphere was light and fun, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation. I could tell people were eager to know what this was all about. As expected, there was no sign of my parents or siblings. I hadn't invited them, and I was fine with that. The reveal wasn't for them. It was for me. Around mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification from the family group chat. My mom had sent a generic "Happy birthday, Nate" message. No punctuation, no extra words. Just the bare minimum. I replied with a simple thank you, and that was the end of it. Kyle, predictably, was still busy hyping up his promotion party in the chat. Emily posted a selfie from some coffee shop, completely ignoring the fact that it was my birthday. It was almost comical how consistent they were. Finally, it was time for the main event. Ryan dimmed the lights, and I stood at the front of the room, looking out at the crowd of friends and family who had shown up. My heart was racing, but I kept my voice steady as I began. "First of all, thank you all for being here," I said. "This means more to me than I can put into words. For most of my life, birthdays have been complicated. I've spent years feeling like they didn't matter, like I didn't matter. But this year, I decided to change that. This year, I wanted to celebrate myself in a way that couldn't be ignored. The room grew quiet. I could see people nodding, their expressions softening as they realized this wasn't just another birthday party. I clicked the remote, and the slideshow began. It started with photos from past birthdays, empty tables, hastily bought grocery store cakes, and a distinct lack of excitement. The audience murmured as the images flashed across the screen, a visual reminder of the neglect I'd felt for years. Then the tone shifted. The next slide revealed the luxury cruise I had booked. Pictures of the ship, the destinations, and the activities filled the screen, accompanied by upbeat music. The final slide read, "Happy birthday to me. This is how I celebrate." The room erupted into applause. Some relatives looked genuinely impressed, clapping and cheering, while others exchanged awkward glances, unsure of how to react. A few came up to me afterward, offering hugs and words of encouragement. "This is incredible, Nate," one of my aunts said. "You deserve this." Ryan and my friends were grinning from ear to ear, clearly proud of how everything had turned out. But not everyone was thrilled. Within minutes, I started getting notifications from social media. My parents had seen the posts about the event. My mom left a comment under one of the photos. "Proud of you, Nate. Wish we'd been there to celebrate with you." I rolled my eyes. It felt forced, like she was scrambling to save face after realizing what she'd missed. Emily texted me separately, calling the whole thing a bit much, while Kyle sarcastically wrote, "Congrats on making a scene." Their reactions didn't surprise me. I knew this would ruffle feathers, but I didn't care. This wasn't about them. As the party wound down, I spent time with my friends, toasting to the success of the event. They had been my biggest supporters through all of this, and I couldn't have pulled it off without them. "You did it," Ryan said, raising his glass. "You made your point." And he was right. For the first time in years, my birthday wasn't just another forgotten day on the calendar. It was a statement, loud and clear. When I got home that night, I scrolled through the photos and videos from the party, reading the comments from friends and relatives. Most were supportive, praising me for taking control and celebrating myself. But my family's silence was noticeable. I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet of my apartment, feeling a strange mix of emotions: pride, relief, and a twinge of sadness. The event had been a success, but it also made one thing painfully clear. My family was never going to change. And maybe that was okay. For the first time, I realized I didn't need their validation. I had created something unforgettable, not for them, but for me. This was my moment, my turning point, and I wasn't going back. The day after the party, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts, missed calls, social media notifications, they were all rolling in non-stop. Most of the messages were from friends and relatives congratulating me on the event or commenting on how bold and creative it was. But then there was my family. The group chat that had been dead silent about my birthday for weeks suddenly came alive. My mom was the first to chime in. "We need to talk. This cruise thing should have been a family decision," she wrote, her words laced with frustration. My dad followed up minutes later with his usual diplomatic approach. "A trip like that should have been something we all planned together, Nate. Why didn't you include us?" Then came Kyle, as blunt as ever. "So this was your way of calling us out? Nice. Real mature." Emily didn't wait long to add her thoughts. "It just feels like you're trying to make everyone look bad." This whole thing was so over the top. I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond or let them stew. Then I decided to send a screenshot of a conversation from the week before. Specifically, the one where everyone had been hyping up Kyle's promotion party while completely ignoring my birthday. Underneath the image, I added one simple caption: "I gave you all a chance. You didn't bother. So I did this for myself." The reaction was immediate. Kyle doubled down, accusing me of making a mountain out of a molehill. Emily called me dramatic and selfish. My mom tried to guilt me, saying I'd misunderstood their intentions and that they'd always been busy but never meant to hurt me. I stayed calm and pointed out the obvious. If you've been busy for 27 years, that's not an excuse. That's a pattern. For the first time in my life, I wasn't backing down. Over the next few days, the tension only grew. My extended family had clearly taken notice of the drama. Several of my aunts and cousins messaged me privately to say they admired what I'd done. Some even shared stories about how they'd felt overlooked or underappreciated by my parents in different ways. It was eye-opening. My parents, on the other hand, weren't handling the fallout well. My mom called me twice in one afternoon, leaving voicemails that swung between guilt-tripping and attempts at reconciliation. "Nate, we never meant to ignore you," one of her messages began. "This cruise could have been a wonderful bonding experience for the whole family if only you talked to us first. Call me back, please." My dad sent a much shorter text. "Let's meet soon and clear the air." Kyle and Emily, predictably, were less about reconciliation and more about deflecting blame. Kyle sent a long-winded message accusing me of being vindictive and intentionally excluding them. Emily claimed I was ruining future birthdays for everyone by making this year all about me. Their words didn't bother me as much as they used to. Therapy had already taught me a lot about setting boundaries, and this was my chance to put it into practice. I responded to both of them in a way that was firm but respectful. "This wasn't about you. It was about standing up for myself after years of being overlooked. If you can't understand that, I can't help you." Ryan, of course, was my sounding board through all of this. When I showed him the messages, he laughed and said, "They're only mad because you flipped the script. For once, they don't get to control the narrative." As the days went on, my parents became more desperate. My mom started calling almost daily, leaving increasingly emotional voicemails about how this rift in the family needed to be healed. My dad eventually chimed in with a more direct approach. "We're calling a family meeting. Saturday at the cafe. Everyone will be there." I agreed, but not without setting some conditions first. I made it clear this meeting wasn't going to be about appeasing them. It was about putting everything on the table. The Saturday of the meeting arrived, and I brought Ryan along for moral support. He stayed in the background, sipping coffee at a nearby table, but knowing he was there gave me an extra boost of confidence. The tension was palpable as I walked into the cafe. My parents and siblings were already seated at a corner table, their expressions ranging from annoyed to uncomfortable. My mom started talking the second I sat down. "Nate, we need to understand why you felt the need to do this," she said, her tone a mix of defensiveness and guilt. "Why didn't you come to us first? This whole thing has made us look bad in front of the extended family." I didn't flinch. "This wasn't about making you look bad. It was about celebrating myself because you've never made me feel celebrated. Every birthday, every milestone. It's always been about Kyle or Emily. I got tired of waiting for things to change." My dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but didn't say anything. My mom looked flustered. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Emily interjected, her voice sharper than I expected. "You can't expect people to know how you feel if you don't speak up." I turned to her, calm but firm. "I did, Emily. For years. I dropped hints. I made suggestions. I reminded everyone weeks in advance. And every single time, something else was more important. You two never had that problem. Every milestone of yours was treated like a national event, while mine was an afterthought." Kyle rolled his eyes and crossed his arms. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is." I stared at him, unflinching. "Of course you'd say that. You've always been the center of attention. You've never had to fight for a fraction of the recognition I've been asking for my entire life." The argument escalated from there. My mom started crying, saying she'd done her best and hadn't realized how unloved I felt. My dad admitted he could have stepped in more, but claimed he thought my mom had things under control. Kyle and Emily were defensive, unwilling to admit any fault. For the first time, I stood my ground and didn't let their deflections distract me. I laid everything out, from the forgotten birthdays to the countless times I'd been overshadowed. I reminded them that this wasn't just about one event. It was about a lifetime of feeling invisible. By the end of the meeting, my parents reluctantly agreed to try harder in the future, though their tone made it clear they were more concerned about saving face than genuinely making amends. Emily, to my surprise, softened a little. She apologized, admitting she hadn't realized how hurtful the dynamic was. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As we left the cafe, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, frustration, and a faint glimmer of hope. The meeting hadn't fixed everything, but it had given me the chance to say my piece. For the first time, I wasn't looking for their validation. I'd celebrated myself, and that was enough. After the tense family meeting, I knew I needed some time to process everything. I didn't block anyone or cut ties dramatically, but I stopped responding to non-essential messages. I needed space, not just from them, but from the cycle of disappointment I'd lived in for so long. My extended family, on the other hand, was more supportive than ever. Over the next few days, aunts, uncles, and cousins kept reaching out, some just to check in, others to share how much they admired what I'd done. A few even told me they had their own stories of feeling ignored or underappreciated by my parents, which made me realize how deep the pattern ran. It was both validating and a little sad to know I wasn't the only one who had been sidelined. To my surprise, Emily sent me a follow-up message a few days later. This time, her tone was different. "Hey Nate, I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the cafe. I just wanted to apologize again. I guess I never really thought about how unfair things were for you, and I'm sorry for that. I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try." Her words caught me off guard. For the first time, it felt like she genuinely understood. We exchanged a few messages, and while it didn't erase years of frustration, it was a step in the right direction. Kyle, predictably, didn't say a word after the meeting. He didn't need to. His silence was just another reminder of how little he thought my feelings mattered. My parents, however, were all over the place. My mom swung between heartfelt apologies and passive-aggressive remarks. One day, she'd send a long text about how much she regretted the past and wanted to rebuild our relationship. The next, she'd drop a comment about how the cruise could have been a great family bonding experience if only I had included them. My dad stayed quieter, but his occasional messages always echoed my mom's sentiments, as if he couldn't quite decide where he stood. I didn't engage much. I kept my responses polite but brief, letting them know I wasn't going to be pulled into their emotional roller coaster. During this time, I started therapy. I'd been avoiding it for years, convincing myself that I could handle things on my own. But after everything came to a head, I realized how much growing up in that environment had shaped me, and not always in good ways. Therapy helped me unpack the years of emotional neglect and gave me tools to set healthier boundaries. It was tough work, but it felt good to finally take control of my own narrative. Then, the cruise finally arrived. I invited a small group of close friends, including Ryan, to join me. It wasn't the original vision of a family trip, but honestly, it was better this way. These were the people who had always shown up for me, who had celebrated me when no one else did. The trip was everything I'd hoped for and more. The ship was luxurious, with stunning views, gourmet meals, and activities that made every day feel like an adventure. We explored beautiful islands, snorkeled in crystal-clear waters, and lounged on private beaches. At night, we'd gather on the deck, watching the stars and laughing until our sides hurt. I posted a few pictures on social media, not to show off, but to share the joy I was feeling. The comments were overwhelmingly positive, with friends and extended family praising me for taking the time to celebrate myself. But, of course, my parents couldn't resist weighing in. My mom left a passive-aggressive comment on one of the photos. "Would have been nice to share this experience as a family." She deleted it later, but not before a few relatives saw it and called her out. My dad didn't say anything publicly, but I heard through the grapevine that both of them were upset about being left out. Interestingly, Emily's perspective seemed to shift even more after seeing the photos. She called me one evening, her voice quieter than usual. "I've been talking to Mom and Dad," she said, "trying to help them see things from your perspective. I don't think they fully get it yet, but I think they're starting to. I just wanted you to know I'm trying." It was the most self-awareness I'd ever seen from her, and it gave me a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could improve. As the holidays approached, my parents invited me to a family gathering. They promised it would be special and hinted that they wanted to make amends. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but after some thought, I decided to go. I made it clear that I'd leave if my boundaries weren't respected. When I arrived, I could tell they were trying. My mom had set up a small table with a belated birthday gift, a thoughtful gesture I hadn't expected. My dad greeted me warmly, and even Kyle seemed less standoffish than usual. The biggest surprise came during dinner. Emily brought up how the family had overlooked my birthdays in the past. She didn't sugarcoat it or make excuses, She just acknowledged the problem and encouraged everyone to do better. My parents looked uncomfortable but nodded in agreement. It wasn't a perfect evening. There were still moments of awkwardness and unspoken tension, but it was a step in the right direction. As I walked home that night, I realized that while things might never fully heal, I was okay with that. I wasn't looking for their validation anymore. The success of the party, the cruise, and the support from my friends had shown me that I didn't need to rely on my family to feel worthy. Looking back, the cruise wasn't just about reclaiming my birthday. It was a turning point, a moment where I finally stood up for myself and demanded the respect I deserved. Moving forward, I'm committed to prioritizing myself and surrounding myself with people who truly care. Whether my family becomes part of that circle remains to be seen. But for the first time in my life, I'm at peace with where I stand. This year wasn't just about a celebration. It was about freedom, and I'm not letting go of that.